Welcome back to Newswire. Now, it is being called one of the worst attacks in South Asian history, with the death toll steadily rising. 8 blasts across Sri Lanka has shook the local international community. And this is saying something, considering Sri Lanka has been embroiled in their own armed conflict for almost 30 years. The government versus the Tamil Tigers, which finally came to an end when the Sri Lankan military killed their leader in 2009. Now, what's most disturbing is the degree of sophistication, the planning and the funding that seems to have gone behind these attacks. Both took place on the extreme ends of the island country, one in the east and two in the west. Sri Lanka has relied heavily on tourism, especially in the past 10 years of relative calm. These attacks come at a time where major hotels were attacked and churches were attacked during Easter celebration, and this will clearly affect the tourism industry in Sri Lanka. What's more is that no group or entity has yet taken responsibility. Facebook, WhatsApp, other social media outlets have been shut down by the government to prevent communal violence stirred from unbridled fake news. The situation is tense, and as the story develops, we will go behind the scenes to understand the context in which such horrifying acts of violence have taken place. I'd like to welcome my guests here. We have with us Easwaran Rutnam. He is a journalist joining us from Colombo, and Mr. Chandima Gamage, a parliamentarian, also joining us from Colombo. Thank you so much for giving us your time here on Newswire. I can't begin to tell you how horrifying the attacks are, how strongly we condemn them. These took place distributed across Sri Lanka. We saw them on the east end, we saw them on the west end. Mr. Rutnam, what do you think this signifies? Is there any significance of the location of these attacks?
Well, the significance, I would think, with the location of the attacks, specifically in Colombo, would be that this is an impact on tourism, because the 3 hotels that were attacked are located very much close to each other. They are in a zone which is filled up with tourists. So this incident does give a bad reputation, not a bad reputation, but it would definitely impact tourism. And the fact that most of the attacks were targeting Colombo, since 2 churches, at least one church was in Colombo, the other one was close to the main airport. So all this gives the impression that it was systematic, and it was targeting not just a certain religious community, but certainly the industry, tourism industry as a whole as well.
Mr. Rutnam, I understand you were in Colombo when this terrible incident, these bomb blasts went off. Could you tell me a little about the first one? Were you there? What were you doing? Give us an idea of what your day turned out to be like.
Well, I was at church at the time this incident happened, at not one of the churches that were attacked, but one of the main churches in Colombo. And as soon as the first bombing took place, all the churches were told to close their gates, and worshippers were told to go back home. And then what we heard later on since was that a bomb had exploded at one of the main hotels, and then subsequently another hotel, and then a third hotel. And these hotels were hosting Easter events, Easter brunches. And that's where there was a large crowd at most of these hotels. The 2 targets, the main one was at Shangri-La, and the other one, the Cinnamon Grand Hotel. These are 2 popular hotels in Colombo. And the explosions took place at their main restaurants, and they were hosting events, Easter events, and that's why this connection between the likelihood of this targeting a certain religious community is being mentioned, is because apart from the churches that were attacked during Easter Mass, these hotels were attacked at the time they were hosting Easter events.
Easter brunch. So it seems like there is one commonality, and that is pointing the finger towards this could be an attack on a religious based attack. But besides that, we have not seen any kind of reports where we can get concrete evidence that this is who is behind this attack, though 24 different arrests have taken place of those who are connected. What is the word on the street? What is the general understanding there of who could be responsible? Because a lot of news is coming out of India pointing the fingers towards Islamic groups.
The reason India is pointing fingers at some Islamic groups is because of some of the attention that is coming out from Sri Lanka itself right now. In fact, the big story in Colombo at this moment is that two government ministers have come out openly at a public press conference and said that there was prior information of these attacks taking place. There was a prior warning. There was an intelligence report that was circulating. The authorities had just yesterday, that's a few hours after this explosion, said that there was no such intelligence report. But now they're saying that there was an intelligence report and that this was not taken seriously by the authorities concerned. And this intelligence report mentions a name of an Islamic organization. This organization has supposedly been planning out these attacks, targeting churches and certain diplomatic missions, including the Indian High Commission. As a result, there is a lot of anger right now as to why, if there was such a report, why prior action was not taken.
Air Marshal Shehzad Chaudhry, defense analyst, joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to Newswire again. What, in your opinion, could be the reason behind or the intention behind these terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka?
Well, my judgment is that it's going to be most likely determined as an extrinsic or an external influenced event, simply because of the fact that within Sri Lanka, the triggers or the instigators for such a event to take place or for such a violence to occur had stopped existing for the last about 10 years now, ever since the war was over and Sri Lanka had found peace. So I think now there are many reasons why I say that. Of course, the first is the amount of external influence within Sri Lanka, especially that of China. There is, of course, a conference to be held in China on the Belt and Road Initiative, and Sri Lanka and its port in Hambantota are a very, very important part of that. And China has, perhaps to some, an exaggerated influence in Sri Lankan's political and social fabric. So that's also there in many ways. So that could be a reason to upstage what China has put in place in terms of a BRI or the Belt Road Initiative. That is one. Secondly, of course, is the fact that I don't know what are the initial reports, but if there is an external hand, it could be of an organization, something like Daesh. I hope not. But people have been mentioning that since yesterday, especially on Western media. Right. If that be the case, then such like activities can also perhaps be generated, or it can generate some sympathy there.
Right. Air Marshal, you've been present in Sri Lanka in various official positions. You spent quite a lot of time there. You were the former High Commissioner there. What is your sense of how the different sort of ethnic and religious backgrounds that people have, the diverse community, how do they mingle, especially in those 10 years following the fall of the Tamil Tigers?
Yeah. Just keep in mind that the ethnic composition of Sri Lanka is very specific in the sense that it has about 75 to 80% Sinhala Buddhists. It has Tamil Hindus and some Muslims, Tamil Muslims as well. But the Tamil as such, as a population, is about, 7 to 8% of the population. The Muslims are about 12% of the population. So that sort of makes up the major ethnic composition of the social fabric in Sri Lanka. Now, this year, Sri Lanka celebrated, in a way, 10 years of its victory against the Tamil Tigers, the LTTE, against which they fought, or against whom they fought for good about 25 years, 28 years of their national life. So that was a very important event. Now, I really can't say. Sometimes many things just get together, collect, accumulate, and create a multifaceted effect on it. For example, is it something of a reminder from the Tamil defeat of 10 years back? Is that a message that has been given? And in that, China also gets affected. The BRI gets affected. So I see that happening. The Muslims, who are about 12%, are again an important factor there, but they've always sort of shed away or shied away from any extremism. And that extremism is essentially because of the fact that they're poor, number one. Number two, they are politically active wherever they are, but dependent on the Sinhala Buddhists to sponsor them or support them. So I don't find that kind of extremism taking root within the Muslims, taking root in Sri Lanka. I doubt that's going to be a possibility, though the possibility of someone externally triggering such an action is quite possible, which can then be blamed onto the Muslims of Sri Lanka, and then a civil strife created there.
Right. And Mr. Rutnam, it's a big question when it comes to considering external factors. If we look into the past, on those bloody years during the Sri Lankan civil war with the Tamils, I mean, India had a crucial role to play in not only just equipping, but also training these Tamil militants.
Yeah, that's right. India was accused of training these Tamil militants during the war. And India was also accused of failing to ensure that they put pressure on the Tamil militants to end the war. India was always seen by the Sinhalese majority in Colombo as a country which supported the militants and which supported the ideology of the militants, although their own Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by the Tamil Tigers. But this incident that just happened in Colombo is seen as something totally out of the box. It was not expected.
It was not expected, or there was information that was available, as I mentioned earlier.
So what's happening here is that you might be aware that there was a sort of a political crisis in Sri Lanka last October, where there was a division rising between the Prime Minister and the President, and that division still remains. So right now, this whole incident is being made as a political issue as well, because we are having members of, I'm sorry to say, even one of your guests, Mr. Gamage, his party is coming out and attacking the President, saying that the President had this information with him, that the IGP had the information with him, but this was not shared with the Prime Minister. But as civilians, as ordinary people, as far as they are concerned, there is one government. The President is heading the government. So how can one say that the President had the information and this information was not shared?
That would put the President in a lot of trouble if it were to be proven. And considering that tensions are already high with him and the Prime Minister, if this information was available and why nothing was done about it. But Air Marshal, just the way it was carried out, strategically, coordinated, and obviously a lot of funding went behind it. Is this something unprecedented in Sri Lanka's history? Analysts, critics around the world are calling it one of the worst in South Asia. I mean, the numbers, the death toll is over 200 now. In fact, 290 last I checked.
As a singular event, it surely is very surprising, and especially for a Sri Lanka that had now pacified considerably. Keep in mind, there have been two earlier waves of terror-related insurgencies in Sri Lanka. One in the 70s, which was actually initiated by the ultra-rightist Sinhala Buddhists themselves. And that is when the Tamils and the Muslims both were targeted within Colombo. But for 300 people to be killed on one day in such a synchronized event is almost an impossibility, other than the fact that it was too, it could not have been triggered by a political intent solely. Now, someone can begin to use it for political advantage or political purpose, and that is the nature of politics anywhere in the world. But knowing Sri Lanka well, I don't think that this kind of a thing could have been actually conceived as a political purpose or a political objective. So I don't look at it that way. I think it is essentially a terror incident meant to perhaps serve many external causes and perhaps to also destabilize Sri Lanka in this way that perhaps some apprehensions that have been held in the neighborhood of Sri Lanka are perhaps defeated. Those apprehensions can really be taken care of by enacting such a thing. It could be far-fetched at the moment, but possibly it cannot be. It's my belief it cannot be done within Sri Lanka. It has to have an external trigger, external financing, external planning, and externally motivated. I don't think it is entirely something to do with Sri Lankan society or politics.
Mr. Rutnam, would you agree with this analysis that it definitely has an external trigger?
Well, the Prime Minister himself had said today that they are looking at the possibility of this having an external hand. He was not specific on where they're looking at and if they're suspecting any organization, but he did say that they are looking at the possibility of some external involvement in this incident.
And also, one of the names that are coming up of the organization is the National Tawheed Jamaat, a little-known group generally, but having a ideology that promotes Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, that's right. So that organization has been in existence for some time, but has not been widely spoken of. So this intelligence report mentions this group and does warn that they would carry out suicide attacks on churches and diplomatic missions. But why that report was not taken seriously, if they felt like in the past there had been some concerns raised about certain extremist groups in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has not been known for Muslim or Islam-related extremist groups operating. It has always been a case where Buddhist groups, Buddhist extremists have been attacking Muslims and churches as well.
In fact, just last year in Kandy, there was a wave of violence where Buddhist Sinhalese attacked a lot of Muslim shops and home fronts. Is that true? That maybe this is not just a violence perpetuated in a minority conflict, but a general threat to the Buddhist Sinhalese that they're facing from other minorities?
Yeah, so the tensions were always between the Buddhists and the Muslims, Buddhist extremist groups at least, not the general public, but Buddhist extremist groups had always targeted mosques and Muslim establishment or Muslim-owned establishments. And now this is something new, that this has resulted in a situation where there is at least some sort of tensions between Muslims and Christians. Right. So it's a case where now the minorities are, facing themselves of having to be at, not at war, but at some sort of odds with other minorities in Sri Lanka.
So, so let me closing remarks from you, Air Marshal. Since it's our last minute, I just want to wrap up your idea of whether this could be a religious, could have some religious elements into it, considering that even the Jamaat that has been named here, where suspicion is falling, is a very unknown and small, insignificant entity in Sri Lanka.
Like I said, I mean, you can utilize any local hand to achieve the purpose or a grander scheme that you have enacted or thought of. Now, who are the sponsors? Who are the controlling hands of this particular Jamaat? I mean, by itself, it does not serve any purpose for the Muslims of Sri Lanka. The Muslims are unlikely to ever dominate the Sinhala Buddhists there. It's an impossibility because they're totally outnumbered. They cannot outdo them in any manner. That has not been the history of Sri Lanka. So that's also an impossibility. So it's barely, if it is true, it is barely serving someone else's intent and interest. Now, who is that someone else is the most important thing to decipher. And let me just add one more thing. I think Sri Lanka is always shy of naming a very large India on its northern borders. It's always been the case, and I don't blame them for that. But unfortunately, the hands that are in play there are far too bigger than Sri Lanka's own capacity to even identify and point out, even when they have very clear doubts about a particular country.
All right, Air Marshal, thank you so much for your time, and also Mr. Rutnam for giving your insight here on Newswire. Fortunately, that's all the time we have. We'll have to wrap up here and see you next time. Till then, goodbye.